We are doing better than ever with this issue and with the discovery of Xerox reducing machines. They were really rare in those days. We have been able to cram so much more into this issue. We also discovered rub-on lettering. This ish has 3 long interviews with Rodney, Backstage Pass, and Spastics, and more record reviews than ever. We're also covering a lot more live reviews, have a regular letters section, a staff photographer Pete Bialano, and a regular cartoon contributors. A mask who spells their name incorrectly, the whiskey, and the Starwood are in full swing, and there are tons of shows to go to. Out of all town bands like the Mumps and the Dead Boys play at the Starwood, so do the Dickies, that now legendary night when Leonard broke his leg and did that band a major recording contract. Oh, believe that, ladies and gents. He broke his leg and got a record. Isn't that amazing? Wish that would happen to me. Lucky bastard.
Flipside at a store?
So I think I saw it at a store. Yeah. In New York, it was like a record store in New York City. But you know, now that I think of it, Al had also given me a copy. I ran into Al one time when I went back and visited, and he was. I was just driving by, and there he was, on Milton, or was it Newland? I forget which street it was in Whittier, but there he was, and we had big greeting. It had been years since we'd seen each other. And that was a nice thing. And so, yeah, I was very, very impressed that our little rag from issue 1, had lasted that long.
As I'm going to read here from the first editorial, all of us were friends and somehow connected with the local scene. X8 and Tory were in low budget, who made their Hollywood debut playing over the Dills and the Whiskey. Larry Lash was in a weird, quick sort of band. Pooch was progressive, and Al couldn't play any instrument, but he just wanted to be involved.
Right. Al was sort of like the manager. He kind of made sure everything got done. Pooch was a good writer. I think he might have majored in that scene, like in something like that. Was he at Long Beach? I forget where he was. But yeah, I think,
English major. Yes.
Yeah. So he had creds for that. And the rest of us were just, suburban brats, just too much time on their hands.
Well, your story's a little unique. You went from punk rock to Cornell. I mean, that's a wonderful story, I'm sure.
Well, the irony is that Cornell would have never had me right out of high school. I took a circuitous trail to get me to Ithaca, New York, but no, we all knew each other for a long time, at least junior high. We knew each other way back when we went to Dexter. I don't know if you're going by like Noam DePunk or like I know these guys by their real names, but I'll just stick with their Flipside names.
Yeah.
Larry was Larry, me, and X8 were all in the same class, and actually Al's younger sister was in our grade too. She used to sit behind me in English.
Mary.
And then, yeah, Mary.
She was so cute. I liked her a lot. Yeah.
Wait, is she still around?
I don't correspond with her at all.
Okay, all right.
I'm sure she is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, it's just the fact that since when we divorced, it just ended. So it's.
I forgot what I was saying. Yeah, we knew each other since junior high. Larry was probably playing rock and roll first. I came later. And then X8 was really, I knew him as a trumpet player in the band, like the wind band and the marching band and all those things. And he'd taken up like guitar. I think he had a guitar, and he also got his hands on a bass. But it wasn't until like our senior year that we really started to do things. I would seen him around, and I'd seen Larry around, and it was great. There were kind of different circles, and I was in a circle of I was listening to classical music. My dad he was a big influence on me. He always played a lot of classical music in the house for himself, and so when I started playing guitar, I started playing classical guitar. And the first thing I did with pop music, after trying some singer-songwriter stuff, was playing in a prog rock band with this keyboard player named Carl, who was like the music wizard at our high school. And Carl was really good, really good. He played a lot of ELP kind of stuff, and Yes, Gentle Giant. And so he and I got together a lot and practiced that stuff. Which kind of made sense because I guess I had music reading creds, and for guitar players, it's a rare thing, even though many of the guitar players at school were much better than I was. But because I could read music, they thought it was, I could handle like prog rock, which I probably couldn't looking back on it. But anyway, so we had this band with some local people, not really from high school. And there were other conversations going on. This guy, Paul, who was in another band called Jekyll and Hyde, and his hatchet man on guitar, Odie, which was short for Ordubagian, was like a really, really talented young fellow. And then Paul's older brother, Dave, who was a dynamite bass player. And they were all pals from those guys from Stryper, like Ozfox and Sweet and those guys. So there's like there are a lot of rock conversations going on in junior and senior year of high school. We'd go to the dances and criticize everybody because we thought they sucked. And then at some point, I remember, this guy across the street, he was about 3 or 4 years older than me. He was a talented musician too, played guitar, but he was kind of, when I started, like he kind of like didn't give me too much attention. But when I started playing classical guitar, he started giving me respect, which is kind of whatever. And so he heard the prog rock band playing in my garage. He'd come over every now and then to listen. And then at some point, X8, he had this space underneath the music building, was called Choral Hall at the high school at Whittier High. And underneath there was like a room that might have doubled as, I don't really know what it was. It might have been the news. He wrote for the newspaper too, I think. Yeah. And so they had this cool little hangout with like, sofas and chairs and tables and stuff where you could kind of like find refuge from the high school crowd because nobody knew where it was. And he was there and he played me on a cassette tape. He used to listen to Rodney on the Rocks, and he'd record the thing on cassette and then play like, the stuff that was coming from New York and across the pond and all that. And the first thing he played for me with were the Ramones. I remember when I heard it, I was just like, because I was in a prog rock band. And I thought at once it was the worst music I've ever heard, but the most exciting thing I'd ever heard. And he told me that they were going to be playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go like in a few weeks. And so, I was excited to go hear him. I went down to hear him and seeing them live. Blondie opened for him.
Wow. Yeah.
And they had an album out. They just had an album out, their first album. And they both did. It was like $5 to get in. It was great. It was loud. What a small space the Whiskey is. It was just such a weird crowd there, all people who I'd later see as stars of, particularly like Tamada Duplanty, and those people were there, and everybody went to go see them. And I didn't know who any of those people were at the time, because it was my first trip to that part of town and seeing that music and that kind of music in that venue. So that's what we did. And then we continued to go there and other places that were around, like, the Larchmont Hall had some music going on for a while, and, over to the Starwood, and, just kind of like, tramp around looking at gigs. I remember one time coming out of the whiskey, and there were some youngsters handing out flyers. The flyers were cool. Everything was like the early Flipside. It was all homemade. And there was this big thing for this band called the Pits. I don't know if you ever saw those guys.
No,
They
I
weren't
didn't.
that great. But the whole flyer was filled with stuff about the Pits and how wonderful they are, and these Xerox pictures of them. And this tiny little corner that said, plus Devo from Akron. So we went to go see the Pits, but Devo opened for them. And of course, they were amazing.
I remember seeing Devo at the Whiskey,
Starwood.
the Starwood. Okay, I
Yeah.
didn't see him there.
Yeah, they were fun. But just funny that all this stuff was happening at the time, and it was very cool. And then so in the process of going to these things, I'd be standing there in line, and somebody would come by and go, they'd get in front of us, and they'd tell the guy at the door, "Screamers +1," and they're like, "Okay, go in." And we're like, what was that all about? It's like, he's from the band. And then we'd see another one guy, Slash Magazine +2 and everything. It's like, wait a minute, too many people are getting in here for free. So we decided if we came up with something bogus, they'd let us in. So we started this rag. We made 100 copies, and it was just, I don't know if you've ever seen the first issue. It's
Yes, I did.
it's just baloney. It's a lot of fun. I remember, what do you have? You had that little gossip page with like vicious rumors and scandals, and everything was made up and just a bunch of lies. But it garnered enough attention. Well, anyway, we made 100 of them at a Xerox machine, and we stapled them ourselves. And we took them to, we lived in Whittier, and there was a record store there where, none of them sold. I think we put 15 of them there. And we took another 20, and we put them like catty corner to like the whiskey was this record store called the Licorice Pizza.
Mhm.
And we put a little stack of them in. And when we went back one day, we went to go see how they were doing. And the guy was like, "They're gone. You got more?" And so we took everything we had. We went back to Levels and got all, because they were going to sell in Whittier. They eventually did sell them in Whittier, but that was later. And yeah, they all sold out pretty much, at least the ones we set out, and then we, I forget, there were many. I think we did 100 of them, maybe less, maybe 50. It wasn't many, but it was a splash. It was definitely a big splash, and we did it some more. And we started lining up other interviews with like, the Quick and the Germs, and who else? Joan Jett and those people. And that was like the summer of '77. It was a lot of fun. I was bound for the conservatory, Cal Arts, California Institute of the Arts, which incidentally is where Denny from the Weirdos had gone to school, and Paul Rubens had gone to school there. And when I was there, yeah. Paul Rubens was there. They were there before I was, but Tim Burton was there when I was there. And we were all just 18-year-old kids. It was fun. And there was a band there called there's a guy named Billy. I think he was a bass player from the Suburban Lawns. He was going there. I don't know if you remember those guys, the Suburban
Yes,
Lawns.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, they were there, and that was exciting, and so, but I found it difficult to go back and forth. I didn't have any wheels, and I think after the third issue, I was just going to gigs whenever I could, but couldn't really contribute to. They were hustling. Pooch and Lash and Al and X8 especially became like kind of part of that scene. I think he eventually wound up living in Al's bar.
Yeah, he was. I consider all of you my mentors in a sense, but and I don't know if you met Pete Lanswick.
Oh yeah.
The photographer.
Yeah,
him
sure.
too.
Very talented too. Yeah. I was just thinking about him. Because I remember coming back one summer, the first summer, and I wanted to start up a band with those guys again, and with X8, and I think he and Pete were doing things together, and I was very eager. We played a little while, but I think they kind of just decided that I wasn't what they wanted anymore. So, but I don't know what happened to X8. I think he was working in the entertainment industry or something.
He
We
is.
shared an email about, I don't know, 1998 or 1999.
Recently, I'm trying to engage a conversation with him and he's not responding. And this is not about pressuring anyone. It's just the narrative. I'm trying to pull the string of the narrative because as I talked with Larry Lash, you see a lot of documentaries now and some, Flipside's excluded. I just want to get Flipside what it deserves within that creative time of the history and the creation story of punk rock in LA, because I know every place across the country had a little hub and they all had their fanzine and their little creation story. So I want to look into that. And you guys, your stories are so rich. I love them. I could listen forever.
That's great. Well, it was such a fun time. And then of course we had that band, which was funny because after he played me that record, we got together and learned how to play Blitzkrieg Bop. It wasn't very difficult music. And he had a bunch of words, a bunch of dark nihilistic poems. And I provided the music for him and I sang it. And this fellow who was my mentor, the across the street, came over one time and, I had all the instruments there from the prog rock band in my parents' garage. They were very patient, my parents. And the guitar player comes from across the street and he says, "Why do you play this junk? You're so much more talented." It's like, and then we played him some recordings. He's like, "This is terrible music. Anybody could play this." And we're like, "We need a drummer." So he went on the drums and took out all his aggression on it. And the next thing you know, that was our band. It was like this stupid little trio, Sam would write the words and I'd write the music and we'd sing them. We'd both sing. And we had, a couple of friends would join us on a couple of numbers. In particular, this really talented photographer, Matt, who was very, very cool. And he sang a couple of songs with us. He even performed with us at the Whiskey the one time we played there. And we had a falling out because I didn't want to split the $55 that the Whiskey gave us because he only sang 2 songs and he never forgave me for it. Actually, we made amends recently, but it's like, it wasn't worth the money. I should have split it 5 ways if I would have, if I could go back and, relive time, but whatever. Anyway, so we all had this thing and we liked playing stuff together and it was great. But at some point, and we mostly played locally where we lived, and we had that one gig in Hollywood and that was our big claim to fame. But other than that, it also gave us the ability to play at the, it gave us some creds to have that zine. And I remember there were a couple of, I think it was Pat Smear in the Germs interview said he loved our band. And we thought, boy, that's flattering. But of course, at the time, they weren't very good. This was like when they had Belinda Carlisle for a drummer, or no, just after, I think. Well, I can't remember.
Do you remember Donna Rhea?
That was her. It was Donna Rhea and Lorna Doom were the 2 women in the band. And at the time, he was Bobby Pinn. And Pat Smear, of course, who's now become like the elder statesman of grunge.
That's a real interesting story.
Yeah, they're great. It was great to be able to go. Remember the first time I saw those guys, there weren't many people in the audience and they were rehearsing on stage and Darby Crash would stop them in the middle of stuff. And I think they were prepared for everybody to like hate them and even throw things at them, that they brought things to throw back. Like I remember them throwing stuff like ketchup or Thousand Island dressing at the audience as soon as, but I think that was sort of the way. I remember, was it Public Image? PIL, Johnny Rotten's second adventure. I saw them at the Olympic Auditorium. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Los Lobos that opened for him. Very weird.
So. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and they were all the crowd up at the front was all gobbing on them, like, hawking loogies at and he even got all upset and saying, "I'm going to make you play for the cleaning bills." And it's just like, whatever. But still, that seemed to be the way that, bands would show their
I noticed that. I saw that with the Damned, as they have those loogies, they'd spit them out and the guys would catch them and they would pass them on. It was like this. I would watch them.
Yeah, I know.
And then it fell, and then they'd start another cycle. I was totally gross, but I was. I guess that was the gross thing, that you were part of the club if you did that.
Well, yeah, all that stuff, and getting told to turn off, or like being kicked out of a venue or something like that. That was all part of the It's just sort of but it was funny because then too, it seemed like it was so new that they're like the venues were like, we're not ready for the crowd. So, I mean, we'd go see like, I don't know, who do we see? Like we'd go to like La Vida Hot Springs and we'd go see, and this is often too, we'd go see like, I think it was like Van Halen opening for the Weirdos, or one time, the Weirdos opened for Van Halen, and one time the Quick opened for Van Halen. And those of us that went to go see the Quick, would be there in our whatever, punk, proto-punk, outfits or whatever. And Van Halen was a different sort of crowd. They were like, I don't know, like a Pasadena truck driving, beer drinking kind of good old boy kind of crowd. And,
some clashing going there.
Yeah. Well, also musically, because, artifice, musical virtuosity was not like the hallmark of most of the punk guitar players. I think, somebody like Steve Hofstetter probably came closest to like, and he was, was really a punk guitar player, but, somebody like, I don't know, the Dills or the, whoever, even, well, I guess Billy Zoom is pretty good for X, but for the most part, virtuosity like Van Halen displayed was not part of the scene. If anything, there was more of a nonchalance to being able to play anything. When I played low budget, I certainly didn't use any classical techniques or prog rock techniques. If anything, it was more showing like, that I didn't do those things. Not that I couldn't. But so when Van Halen would play at those places, we were just like, whatever. It's so boring to hear him going on and on and on. We referred to it like, almost like it was self-indulgent in a sexual sort of way on his part to be doing such a thing. But, later on he becomes real big and, nobody will listen to you when he's on. I saw those guys and they sucked.
You watch a lot of the music from the 90s. It's the pattern is they always eventually put in that lead, that when punk rock, it just wasn't there, that it just wasn't there. It was really fast and improvised. And even though I know all you guys had a lot more talent than you shoot, it just showed, but it was that energy that was so unique. That energy. It was.
Yeah.
And that rebellion. You got to face it. It was a bit rebellion against everything, however long that was.
Yeah. It seemed like music of the 70s, had become, I mean, if you leave disco out of it, all the other pop stuff that was coming out at the time was so processed and overdone. And, you got stuff like, ELO and Billy Joel and all this stuff that's like pretty sounding, but it's like almost like too much of an effort to achieve those ends. And it didn't have the kind of thing that, we valued. Like in high school, besides, my little prog rock thing that was going on, I really at the same time enjoyed listening to T-Rex and Slade and some of those bands that were the Sweet, any of those bands, because they were just kind of to the point.
Yeah, I know Al was a DJ at the high school. And
really? Wow.
So at Whittier High School, and he had his record collection was everything, and I learned so much through his record collection.
Yeah.
But the momentum was there with Flipside, right? It was there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it was early enough where, never mind the Bullocks hadn't even come out. The Ramones hadn't come out with a second album. There were very little bands that had a recording. And certainly the bigger labels didn't want to take a chance on them. So you had things like, Slash Records would produce an album or across the way, Stiff Records. And I think I'm not sure the EMI version of God Save the Queen. I can't remember if that was like on EMI or if it was like some subsidiary or something, but no big label. None of the majors were. Well, it's kind of like in the 1950s when rock and roll came along. It had to be little things like Sun Records or Checker or Chess or Atco, who was just emerging at the time, to take a chance on groups like the Drifters and.
Did you listen to the Saints from Australia?
No, I didn't know the Saints too much.
Well, Ed Cooper, the guitarist, he was also a very good, and he still plays. He's progressed into all different types of bands, but they're coming out with some recordings, new recordings of their music. So
the Saints.
I thought that was interesting after all these years, after 40-something years. But they're kind of how I got into the punk scene, was the Saints from Australia. So, but Ed is a phenomenal guitar player, and he tours all through Australia. He has for years, and if you ever want to see him, I mean, he's a punk that stayed kind of in that. I don't know what you call it. He's just, you can't classify him, but he did kind of originate the punk sound in his guitar. And I like that not being classified motif of the early punk scene, because it was just, like you say, so many different scenes coming together. But then out of that, this punk scene did start, where it was a scene.
Definitely little clicks going on here and there. And I didn't really pay much attention to anybody. I think there were others who really wanted to make the scene. And I think I was just too shy and sort of wore more like a mode of indifference.
I always went the path of least resistance, right?
There you go.
But then, there was Al. I was a piece of artist, and he said, I need one. And I go, okay. And I did a cover, and then I was in. It just happened.
Oh, wow. Is that
I
how
didn't
that
plan it.
I don't even think about it, because I was probably so naive at the time. But like, I didn't drink at that age. I smoked pot, but I certainly didn't do anything like pills or snort anything. And so that was probably there, but it was just like over my head.
Yeah, it's me too.
Kids,
I'd always look the other way.
Fade to black.